Good morning, Girdwood Chapel United Methodist Church. I am Alexa Eisenbath, and I'm the pastor of Ording United Methodist Church. Ording is about 10 miles from Puyallup, Washington, just east of Tacoma. I'm so excited to be with you here this morning, and I'm even more elated to be collaborating with your pastor, Nico. It's been so challenging and surprising to transition to online ministry during this pandemic. And it has been so refreshing to meet virtually with colleagues from Alaska and Oregon and around the Pacific Northwest in order to share the labor together and do ministry more effectively in our communities. It's good to be with you here this morning. Our main question for today is, where do we begin when sharing our faith with other people? For the last 50 years or so, the church has been really obsessed with starting with the sin of humanity and Christ on the cross. And I'm not saying that those aren't valuable pieces of the puzzle, but they might not be the right starting point for you when sharing your faith. And the thing is that salvation didn't just come into the world's imagination when Christ was born. No, salvation has been a thing that God has been doing since the beginning of time, since creation. In fact, everything God does is a saving act. At the beginning, God created. And then, after some time, God liberated the people of Israel. Then, after some time, God came to human beings in the flesh. God incarnated the world. Then after some time, God died on a cross. Then after some time, God rose from the dead. Then after some time, we trust that God will restore the world in completeness. These are all saving acts of God. All of them have saved us, are saving us, will save us. God creates, God liberates, God incarnates and fleshes, God dies, God resurrects, God restores and redeems. These are the things God does, and they save us over and over again. And there are lots of other things that God does. Our psalm for this morning shares that God lifts up the lowly and feeds the hungry and satisfies the desires of all who are faithful to God. God is near to us, protects us, and preserves our life. These two are saving acts of God. Our starting point as Christians, I think, must always be God's goodness. So where is it? Is it in God's creating or liberating or incarnating or dying or resurrecting or restoring, where you experience God's salvation right now? I think that's the place you start. So my starting point is incarnation, at least for now. Incarnation is meaningful to me, and it feels and is a good action of God, because God chose to experience the same risk and the same vulnerability that I do, that I experience. We've talked in the last 4 years as a society about what the risk is to be a woman in the world. We risk violence just by being women. We could be the recipients of violence at any time as a woman. And as human beings, all human beings, we are vulnerable to disease that doesn't make sense. We are vulnerable to pandemics. We are vulnerable to oppression. We are vulnerable to evil. We are vulnerable to death. And God chose to take on that vulnerability, chose to risk it all, chose to risk life itself, to share that experience with me, with you, and restore it. So for now, incarnation is my starting point. God choosing to come to the world wrapped in flesh is my starting point, because that is where I experience God's goodness. So where is it that you experience God's goodness? What is the act of God that saves you?